shy, there's seats in the front row if you want to move up a little bit. Just a heads up, we are recording this event, but we're not going to record any comments from the audience. So I think at the end there may be some time for Q&A, and we will not be recording that section. But just be conscious of that. If you're like coughing loudly or something, step outside because it will be on the recording. My name is Dana. I work here at Haymarket House. I want to welcome you to our space and our event tonight, Do No Harm, Medical Apartheid in Palestine. This is a teach-in, so hopefully folks in this space are here to learn and together in community. We are in very dark times right now. As people know, this week has been especially difficult to see what is happening in Gaza, especially as it relates to hospitals and children and many, many innocent lives being lost. So I think it's important for us to come together in community, and we welcome you in this space. Thank you for making time on a Friday night to come be here with us. I'm really excited about the folks who are putting this event on, Healthcare Workers for Palestine. They're going to talk more about their work and upcoming things you can be involved in with their group. Just a little bit about Haymarket House and some housekeeping things. So Haymarket House, if you've never been here before, the home of Haymarket Books. We're a radical publisher based here in Chicago. Our offices are upstairs, and then this is a community event space, so we hold lots of events here, trying to bring together people who want to change the world, and people who want to talk about politics, community, literature, all those good things. I also want to acknowledge that all of our events take place on occupied lands. This is the Council of Three Fires Lands, the indigenous keepers of Chicago and Illinois, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes. We stand in solidarity with their ongoing struggles for land back and liberation, and acknowledge that occupation isn't just something that happens overseas, but it has also happened here in this country. And I also want to say that Haymarket House is a safe space, so anybody who is disrespectful or threatening in this space, we will ask you to leave. I feel like that's especially important to say right now because of all the violence that has been happening on campuses, and particularly directed at our Arab and Muslim siblings in this struggle. I also want to recommend to people that when you leave this space, that you leave with others, just for building community and keeping each other safe. We don't want anyone to be walking alone and be harassed in any spaces around the building as well. So just keep that in mind. We will have refreshments, some snacks and some drinks afterwards if folks want to hang around and mingle. This is part of building a community and being with each other in this space. So folks are welcome to stay afterwards. And restrooms are down the hallway, housekeeping. They're gender neutral, so pick whatever bathroom you want. And now I'm going to turn it over to our event organizers to get us started on the program. Oh, you know what? We're asking that folks don't record because of what's been happening with doxing. I think private recordings, we're asking folks not to do that unless the folks speaking are okay with that. It's been kind of our policy for our events. We are recording and it'll go up on our YouTube channel, but just so things don't get taken out of context or people don't. Does that work? There's just been instances where people's photos have ended up online and out of context, and in order to keep folks safe. Yeah, but the video will be up on our YouTube channel, and as soon as possible people can watch it. We have a series called Until Liberation that's on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. All of our Palestine events live there. So if you're interested in other events, feel free to check it out. All right, I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. May peace be upon you. My name is Malak Abdisalam, and I'm a first-year medical student and a Palestinian who grew up in the West Bank. Just 12 weeks ago, I stood up in front of the different crowd, raised my hand, and recited the Hippocratic Oath at my white coat ceremony. I solemnly pledged to dedicate my life to a service of humanity, and I pledged to maintain the utmost respect for human life. I promise to not permit considerations of age, disease or disability, creed, ethnic origin, gender, nationality, political affiliation, race, sexual orientation, or social standing, or any other factor to intervene between my duty and my patient. I was naive then. The person who I was 12 weeks ago would have never imagined that the death toll in Gaza would reach over 11,000, with over 4,500 of those being children. I would have never imagined that 60% of hospitals would have been put out of service, and 223 medical staff would have been killed. I would have never imagined that the members of the American Medical Association and doctors and healthcare workers worldwide would shed a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians and promote these acts of violence. Palestinians are living through a mass genocide, and we are watching it through the screens of our phone. We are watching our doctors work through unimaginable conditions, abiding in the oath they took, no matter how life-threatening it is. When Dr. Hammam Mahmoud Allah was asked why he would not evacuate Al-Shifa Hospital, he reminded us of the Hippocratic oath that he had taken, the same one that many of us in this room have taken. Shortly after, he was killed. I want to highlight him today as an epitome of the Hippocratic oath. I only hope that one day we can have the amount of humanity and bravery that he had. Tonight is our chance to become one step closer to that. We come together to learn. The Healthcare Workers for Palestine are a group of doctors, nurses, paramedics, EMTs, medical and dental students, and other healthcare professionals dedicated to Palestinian liberation. We are healthcare workers, standing in solidarity with us, their Palestinian colleagues. We present here today for an opportunity to be educated. Let us not forget, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. Before we start the evening, I want to alert you to everyone wearing the red stickers. You can direct your questions to them, they're all over the room. And then to start our night, our first speaker is Ahmed Abu Shab. He's a Palestinian nurse and activist living in Chicago. He has led and participated in student BDS campaigns at Ohio State and has organized around community justice issues.
You guys mind if I like back off or?
You can have mask off, but for everyone in the audience.
I have like, probably,
You can hold the mic.
oh yeah. So this first part that I'm gonna give is kind of like a brief history of Palestine and like history of our movement from the early 1900s to now, and like the British Mandate. This is probably going to be a review for a lot of you, but hopefully for some of you it's informative. And then I would like to get into, the meat of what's happening now, why we're calling it genocide, why we're talking about why we're here, and I hope that we can spur some conversations in the room, about how we can organize our workplaces and how we can end complicity within the United States. But so whenever. Oh, actually, that part starts a little later.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Up to the part that has my name on it, and then the slide after that. So, then the next slide. There we go. So the first part. So, when we talk about Palestine, we're not actually always talking about a nation state. Lots of times people will try to say, there is no Palestinian state, there is no Palestinian state. But really Palestine is talking about a land between the Jordan River and in the Mediterranean Sea. this is why we talk about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We're talking about a land of rich history and the people that have lived within it. Many peoples have lived in it, many civilizations have lived within it. Our three major religions trace their origins to this land. And Ottoman rule and British rule have denied self-determination to the inhabitants of this land, the indigenous inhabitants. And in the early 1920s, during the British Mandate, the Balfour Declaration, Lord Balfour writes to the Zionist movement. He says he is in support, the British Empire is in support of calls for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. So even when we're talking about Zionism and the beginnings of a Zionist state, it's talking about a home for Jewish people in Palestine. But the Zionist movement was aspiring to establish a Jewish nation state in Palestine that would be majority Jewish on land that was inhabited by Palestinians. They would say, a land for a people, or a land without people for a people without land, despite the fact that we, in fact, were living there. Next slide. And that brings us to a Nakba. A Nakba in 1947, 1948, Zionist militias kicked out, expelled an estimated 700,000 Palestinians, about half of the Palestinian population within historic Palestine, and a population of people that was greater than the Jewish settlers within Palestine at that time, who wanted to have a majority of the land. They kicked us out. They kicked our ancestors out. And well-organized settler militias waged war on civilian villages where they had very few in weapons. Examples of this are Israel's expulsions of Palestinians is Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin is just west of Jerusalem on land that was meant to be partitioned by the UN for a Palestinian state, but Israel annexed it and depopulated it. The Lehi militia killed around 150 villagers after they had already signed a non-aggression pact with the Zionist militias, with the Haganah. And eyewitness testimony talked about crimes of torture and mutilation against villagers. Again, a village that was described to be very friendly to the Zionist militias and neutral in conflict. So my parents are from Al Khalid, and also west of Al Khalid, Al Dawaima. In 1948, Zionist militias opened fire and killed hundreds of villagers, many women and children, and the Zionist troops themselves attested to committing these same types of acts, and many of the villagers left. And since then, that land has been annexed by Israel. So, when we're talking about the Nakba, a lot of times people contest it, but it is an undeniable fact. The El Dawaim massacre is literally why I'm here. My father, in 1967, lived in a village near El Dawaima, and his father told him he needs to leave because of the fear of the massacres that the Zionists committed in 48, repeating themselves in 67. And even people from the Israeli government will not deny this. And later I will show you guys a quote of an Israeli official talking about committing the second Nakba. Next slide. This is the progression of land loss. In 1918, as you can see there, the black is the Jewish settlements. There were actually very few Jewish settlements, and most of the land was inhabited by indigenous Palestinians who were not Jewish, who came from different religions. Even at the time of 47, most of the land was inhabited by non-Jewish Palestinians. And then by 1960, you see this great land loss. And now, even within the West Bank, that was supposed to be partitioned for us, and it is outside of the green line in 1967, Israel has established settlement and continued to expand in the land. Next slide. So right now, what we have is a one-state reality in Palestine. I'm not going to say everything within this graphic, but I do want to highlight one of the things that Palestinians in the West Bank experience is that they're subject, and most of the West Bank is Area C, that it says in here. They're subject to Israeli military courts. And in Israeli military courts, if you break the law, there is a 98% conviction rate. So either, Palestinians are the guiltiest people in the history of time, or, this is an unjust system that is discriminatory towards Palestinians. It's an apartheid system, and it's meant to lock up Palestinians and keep them under wraps and terrorized. And, you can even be subject to a military court if you don't pay parking tickets, or if you don't pay driving tickets. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. And we're talking about 15,000 Palestinians now being held in Israeli military jails, and many of them, about 1,000 every year, are being held in administrative detention. And administrative detention, if you don't know about it, is being held without charge or trial. Many Palestinians have resisted this with hunger strikes. They've gone on for months, and sometimes it works. Sometimes they end the administrative detention because it gets enough international condemnation. Here's some more graphics. One thing my parents and my family back home really love to talk to me about the roads, so this one really hit with me. I mean, whenever there is a new Jewish settlement and that is established, where a road where Palestinians should be, the Palestinian road actually, we can't drive on it with the Palestinian permit, so we build a new road and go around, and it makes the traffic just awful, that and with the checkpoints. So we have a segregated road system, and then as we're starting to talk about Gaza specifically, because a lot of the terror in Palestine is specifically inflicted on Gaza, we see there is actually a pre-Hamas context to the subjugation of Gaza. Gaza is not just being isolated because of Hamas. As you see, in 1991, there was a permit system being introduced where citizens of Palestinians in Gaza had to have an Israeli permit to leave. There is Israeli control in the form of building fences, in the form of bombing airports in Gaza. There is no, in Gaza, they don't have full access to their water. And also, a family separation policy. Now, if you were a Gaza resident in 2003, if your family is in the West Bank, you cannot be a resident of the West Bank and you're a resident of Gaza. You have to be one or the other. So they're practicing a family separation policy, something that, we have often decried the treatment of immigrants here in the United States. So again, there's a pre-Hamas context. Hamas does not come to rule Gaza until 2006. There's a pre-Hamas context to the subjugation of Gaza specifically. Next slide. This is more about what Palestinians in Gaza are experiencing. So if you are, now it's this graphic says 14 years because it's 2 years old. If you're a 16-year-old in Gaza, look at all of the things that you have experienced. You've experienced a war on Gaza that killed 1,300 people in 2008. And then in 2012, more bombings. More bombings in 2014, where 2,000 Palestinians were killed and 556 children. If you were 16, you lived through the Great Return March, which I'm gonna explain more about because I actually think it's very important context for seeing where we're at now. And then in 2021, another bombing campaign where the New York Times actually published the faces of the 67 children that were killed by the Israeli occupation forces. So again, think about all of the trauma, the poverty, and the terror that just a 16-year-old in Gaza has experienced in their life. No. So I wanted to talk about the Great March of Return, because the Great March of Return was a nonviolent protest, was kind of a scream from the inside of a Gaza prison, where Palestinians marched to the siege borders, they marched to the blockade borders. And most Palestinians of Gaza are not from Gaza. That's why I say Palestinians from Gaza and not Gazans, because most Palestinians from Gaza are not from Gaza. They're from Be'er-Seba, what they call Beersheba. They're from Yafa. They're from Hajj. They're from a lot of different towns from within Israel. And it's important to understand that most of the people being killed are refugees, and they were met with impunity. They were screaming for freedom. They were calling for freedom, and yet their calls were not heard in 2018. Slide. So here we have a visual. This is Jabalia refugee camp. So I wanted to show you guys Jabalia refugee camp, because Jabalia refugee camp is really a flashpoint for the terror that's being inflicted by Israel right now. Israel claimed that it caused this amount of destruction to kill one Hamas member. And hundreds of Palestinians died in this specific bombing. So this is modern day. This is present. And as you all know, and as has been discussed, over 11,000 Palestinians have been killed since the Hamas operation. They killed approximately 1,200 Israelis and took 200 hostages in the hopes of getting some of those people, hostages specifically, in the hopes of getting people out of the Israeli occupation jails. But again, Jabalia refugee camp is just a symbol, flashpoint, Israel's terror on civilian population of Gaza. They've cut all water, electricity, fuel to Gaza, and have continued to starve people in Gaza out while murdering them with these kinds of bombings. And targeting hospitals, targeting Rantisi Children's Hospital, targeting Al-Shifa Hospital, targeting Al-Ahli Hospital, a hospital which it bombed and then fabricated evidence to say that they did not bomb it. The New York Times and Forensic Architecture debunked their story, and yet the U.S. has not, said, Israel bombed Al-Ahli. At first, they said they would never bomb Al-Ahli, and then they start saying the hospitals are legitimate military targets, right? So you see how we're kind of being gaslit and ripped off. Yes. I think that maybe a slide that so these are examples of healthcare workers that have been martyred by Israel. Razan al-Najjar was killed during the Great March of Return. This is a well-documented case of Israel killing a medic, a Palestinian medic, who was tending to the wounds of another person that they had shot, who they shot in the back while she was wearing a medical vest. Israel promised to investigate itself on the matter, but as with some 99% of Israeli investigations of misconduct of its own troops, it has not actually held anybody accountable for this murder. And then this is Dr. Hanan Allo, which, as we discussed earlier, he talked about the Hippocratic Oath. And I actually want to highlight what he said to Amy Goodman in an interview with Democracy Now! Because I think that it's very important, as we are healthcare workers, to understand where the heroes of Gaza are coming from. He said to Amy Goodman when asked whether why he has not heeded the calls to leave cell. He said, "And if I go, who treats my patients? We're not animals. We have a right to proper health care. You think I went to medical school and for my postgraduate degrees for a total of 14 years so I can only think about my life and not my patients? I'm asking you, do you think this is the reason I went to medical school? To only think about my life?" Dr. Hammam Allah is a hero, a martyr, and a person who cared about his patients in Al-Shifa to the point where he and his family were bombed by Israeli strikes. And I just want to kind of leave you guys with these images as, this is the end of my portion. I want to say that, may they and every one of our 200 martyred Palestinian health care workers rest in power.
Thank you so much for speaking. I want to bring up our second speaker. We have Zaid Ahmed. He is a board-certified emergency medicine physician at Advocate Christ Medical Center. Zaid has served as an assistant program director for the emergency medicine residency program at Advocate Christ and the global health director for the emergency department at Advocate Christ. He is also an assistant clinical professor at UIC.
I'm also a board member for a NGO on the ground in Gaza now called Med Global. We have an office in Gaza City. We have 5 staff members, 2 of whom are in a Shifa hospital, still under siege. We have intermittent communication with them. And so I just wanted to kind of obviously start with that and just let you know a little bit of kind of my background. I'm a Palestinian from the West Bank, actually from a suburb of North Jerusalem. And my family is in the West Bank, but I've been to Gaza multiple times, all after conflicts, all since 2008, after Operation Cast Lead. And I've most recently been there last November, specifically at a Shifa hospital. And the goal is really just to kind of build the capacity of local healthcare workers and support local healthcare workers in Gaza and try to provide them any opportunity that they're looking for to be able to increase their capacity and serve some of the needs. I think it's, I want to be straightforward with you, and I want to be as honest as possible. This is really uncharted territory when it comes to what's happening in Gaza right now. Every single NGO, the United Nations, most people that are looking at this, we've not seen this sort of aggression inflicted on the civilian population of Gaza. It is surreal because we've had a lot of experience in the previous conflicts and a lot of experience seeing kind of how Israeli military campaigns go, and then kind of that response. I think we're all scratching our heads trying to figure out when this nightmare is going to be over, but also starting to work on what does the future look like for the people in Gaza. So I think I'll just start with, if we can go to the next slide here, and we go to the next one. So just kind of a quick geography look at Gaza. Obviously, we see it as this small strip of land. I love the analogy that it's, in terms of its length, it's shorter than the length of a marathon, 25 miles long. The width at its most is approximately 8 miles, 5 miles if you're really looking at where the population centers are. It is 50% food insecure prior to this conflict. That number right now, according to the World Food Program, is 100% food insecure. And that question is really tough to kind of answer, because what does that mean? I mean, food insecure, we know that access to food is limited. But essentially what that means is based on the Sphere Handbook, which was developed by the United Nations. It says that people in Gaza, at any given time, 50% prior to the war, 100% now, will never have a meal where they're able to get their fill or fill their stomach, is really how you need to understand that. They'll never have the recommended amount of calorie intake, never have the recommended portions that you're supposed to have. Right now that number is at 100%. If we go to the next slide, this is kind of how the population centers look like. There's really 5 governments in Gaza, starting with the north up top. What you see is Beit Hanun, Beit Labia, and then that biggest chunk right there, that's Gaza City, that's the Gaza government, that's where a Shifa hospital is, that's where it's the most densely part of Gaza. And then as you kind of move towards the south, you have Rafah, which is at that border that we see over here between Egypt and Gaza, and then you have where Dir al-Balah is, as well as another refugee camp site. Again, more densely populated than Tokyo. I think the way to understand this, at least from a healthcare perspective, is that this is a very crowded area. The way the buildings are even built there, it's very crowded, very close to each other. There's not a lot of separation between the infrastructure that's there. And of course, that is exceptionally relevant if there's going to be airstrikes in these areas. And so the large majority of civilian casualties, as you would expect, are going to be located in kind of Gaza City, where you see up there towards the north. We can go to the next slide here. So, from a humanitarian healthcare worker perspective, we know in June 2007, essentially the Israelis had a blockade imposed. Now, it was already very difficult to move in and out of Gaza, much like the speaker before me mentioned. In fact, people in the West Bank have never been to the Gaza Strip. The vast majority of them have never been to the Gaza Strip. And people in Gaza who have left Gaza towards and made it to West Bank, it's usually medical referrals or some sort of permission. Sometimes there are some people who are allowed in for some trade purposes. But for the vast majority of people, they'll never leave the Gaza Strip, and the vast majority of people in the West Bank, they probably will never visit the Gaza Strip. What it means is that all of Gaza is blockaded, land, sea, air. We hear that all the time. It's blockaded, land, sea, and air. Gaza is a coast. There's a coast right on Gaza. There are a lot of fishermen who live in Gaza. What that means in terms of a sea blockade is the amount of miles that they're able to go do their fishing is severely restricted. It's imposed by who? By the Israeli Navy. And so there are certain miles off the coast that they're allowed to go to do their fishing. As you'd anticipate, if you kind of shutter them in that way, your ability to be an effective fisherman and get a decent catch is limited in that fashion. And so that's kind of how I would understand the sea portion of this. And then the air blockade, there was always plans for an airport, and it would be based in Gaza. In fact, there's a famous site in Gaza, if you ever see it, but there's the old helicopter of Yasser Arafat, who was the previous president before Mahmoud Abbas. And it's kind of just stuck there, and it's kind of a symbol of there's supposed to be this hope of this airport, and people would be able to leave, and it would be able to develop economically, and that never materialized. So the airspace is totally controlled by Israel, so much so that when the Jordanian Air Force 2 weeks ago dropped supplies in Gaza, all of their coordination took place only with the Israelis. So they have total control of the airspace. And then, of course, the land, which is very important, and we'll get to that. There are 3 sort of entrances into Gaza. Rafah border is between Egypt and Gaza. That is also primarily controlled by the Israelis. There's no boots on the ground, there's no soldiers, but all of the security coordination takes place with the Israelis, and the Egyptians have said so on multiple occasions. As well as Karam Shalom, which is a crossing that was used 3 weeks ago. It's been closed since October 7th, but it was used 3 weeks ago to expel all of the Palestinian workers who are from Gaza out of Israel into Gaza. And then there's the Erez crossing, which is very north, and that's your main pedestrian crossing. That's the crossing that I used every time I visited Gaza. We can go to the next slide here. So I just wanted to kind of give a brief sort of understanding prior to this military campaign, what Gaza looked like in terms of some of the impacts on health. Essentially, there are several gaps here in terms of care, and it's mostly centered around I would call it second degree or specialized care. And so that is what you'll see is most of the people in Gaza are not able to get the care that they need inside of Gaza if it goes beyond primary health care. And cancer is top of the order in terms of how many people are requesting to leave Gaza and be able to get chemotherapy somewhere else. So that makes your top 3 medical referrals here: cancer, cardiac catheterization, so heart disease is something that of course needs to be monitored in any sort of population health study. And what we know is that there's a significant portion of the population that cannot get the specialized care they need, as well as urology and nephrology. What about essential medicines? How do we categorize essential medicines? What you're talking about is blood pressure medicines, insulin for diabetes, metformin for diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, so high cholesterol, as well as some of the antibiotics, basic antibiotics, not any heavy-duty things that you'd expect. You want to look at what the availability is, especially you can compare it to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. You see that the availability, of course this is prior to the conflict, or prior to the war, or prior to whatever you want to call it. This is kind of what the availability is in Gaza. So they're heavily dependent on outsourcing their specialized care, but also heavily dependent on importing or bringing in medicines through NGOs or the United Nations. And then all of these referrals are processed, and I think I'll go through in the next slide here, but just to give you an idea, in 2021, there were 284,000 referrals over the last 3 years, ending in 2021. So this is the process. This is what happens. If you are somebody in Gaza who gets diagnosed with something that needs to be treated outside of Gaza, this is how it goes. Essentially, this medical approval comes through the Ministry of Health. So you get a diagnosis. You say, hey, these services are not offered in Gaza right now. You get the approval through the Ministry of Health. They also evaluate whether or not they can fund this. So the idea is the Ministry of Health should cover most of the cost for the people in Gaza. If the allotted cost is not within the budget, then you look for outside sources. For example, I saw one of the organizations that's on the list here, I believe is PCRF. They're an organization that tends to be able to cover a lot of the costs, and they'll cover bringing people even to the States to do specialized care. And then, of course, you have an appointment day. I just want you to, I'm not going to go through the entire process, but I just want you to notice the time frame for some of these things. And so that impacts the morbidity and mortality of people who are affected by the conditions that need care outside of Gaza. And we can see the majority of them are going to East Jerusalem and the West Bank. 6% goes to Israel, 12% to Egypt, and then 27% is within actual Gaza. So most of those people can maybe go to Shifa Hospital from the surrounding healthcare facilities. And then Turkey, Kuwait, and Qatar are probably 3 other main countries that will take in Palestinian medical cases. I think we can go to the next slide here. So how many people get approved if you do apply? I think that's an important question that we have to ask ourselves. So 65% of people will get approved. These are the specialties I wanted to point out that they have the lowest approval rates. Of course, this is more specialized care, urology, orthopedics, ophthalmology. And then what you want to begin to start to assess is, well, how does that affect the patients who are getting rejected or who are going through this process, who are going through some of these delays? And so what we can see is that, depending on what the mortality is, I should say, depending on how critical the illness is or how critical the condition is, of course, the higher the mortality is. But if we're talking about life-saving procedures, 1/3 of these people will die because of the delays. So things that there are known treatments for it or cures, 1/3 of those people will die in Gaza waiting to get the care that they need. Go to the next slide. So movement along the border. What you're looking at here is the Erez crossing. This is the main pedestrian crossing between northern Gaza into Israel. And so this is a very long sort of entryway. You do not encounter anybody during this entire process. You're just in a long line of people. If you go further that way, you'll have kind of the Palestinian Authority sort of checkpoint area. And then if you go further into, you see this massive structure, and that's when you will encounter the Israelis. But many people will, if they need to leave, they'll have to go through this process. The reason I put this picture here specifically is because these are really tight to get through. And so the idea is you cannot bring a lot of things with you. As you can imagine, if you are a pediatric patient who has a cancer that needs chemotherapy, the idea is bare bones minimum. Chargers are not allowed through this place, in addition to other larger electronics. Only a phone is the smallest electronic. So I think that's important in terms of sort of what people who are seeking medical care, what they have to go through. On the other side, in terms of Egypt, this is a very costly journey for Palestinians. You know, as far back as 2017, it was costing them $5,000. And some of this is related to the corruption associated with trying to cross into Egypt. And then some of this is just sort of some of the bureaucratic processes in place that, in my opinion, it just seeks to limit sort of a Palestinian burden on Egyptian healthcare. So that cost was around $1,200 in 2019. Again, if half the population is living below the poverty line, this is, you know, prohibitively expensive to seek medical care. And so you can understand what the implications are. The second part of this is you have to understand, can the patient handle the journey? We're asking people to leave Gaza to go get care elsewhere. There's a reason for that. But can they handle the arduous process of going into another country? And Egypt, for several years, has sort of cleared the Sinai Peninsula in a way where the first point of contact with a healthcare facility is 450 kilometers away from Rafah. So that's half a day worth. So it's important to kind of consider some of the risks associated with transfer. And just wanted to point out how long it would take an ambulance, which ambulances are only allowed to be used for urgent or emergent cases. It takes 68 minutes to kind of get through the Erez crossing. The other thing is, what about bringing in medical supplies? And this is something that my organization has to deal with quite a bit, is you need to get approval and you need to have coordination long before. We, of course, want sustainable goals for the healthcare facilities in Gaza. I think that's sort of the best foot forward, at least I thought it was. And part of that is making sure that they have the equipment that they need to be able to do so, to be able to be independent of any sort of outside aid or intervention. And so what we see is, around 69% of some of the medical equipment stuff was rejected. And I want you to think about an X-ray machine, parts for it, being able to update it, CT scanner. That's what's getting rejected here. It's not, antibiotics. It's something that really can prohibit the capacity of care that you can deliver. Oxygen generators, for example, in 2021, 9 out of 13 were denied. So that you start thinking about ventilators, incubators. That's the sort of downstream effects here. And then 2 requests for entry for an MRI machine and spare parts were both approved, and those are the only 2 MRIs that are in the Gaza Strip servicing the more than 2.2 to 2.3 million people. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so impacts of health. Anytime we're thinking about what the people in Gaza are facing, we talked a little bit about what the food insecurity means, water pollution, and how that can be associated with kidney disease and renal dysfunction. Sort of Oxfam was saying that there are, to kind of meet the demand for water and sanitation, I'm not sure if you've heard, but prior to the conflict, they were suggesting that 94, depending on who you ask, 94 to 96% of the water in Gaza was not fit for human consumption. And so the idea was to build an infrastructure to make the water more appropriate for consumption. You'd need around 3,000 items, 16% at that time were not approved. And then 96% of Gaza's sole occupiers is unfit for human consumption. So that's sort of, we'll get into a little bit about what that means and where these structures are and how that works. This is just a comparison of the occupied Palestinian territory outcomes and life expectancy versus Israeli outcomes and life expectancy. So you can kind of look at the raw numbers, and it's kind of bizarre to say, but you have to keep in mind that the violence against Palestinians skews the number a little bit. So you cannot just rely on life expectancy. You cannot just say, oh look, Palestinians on average in 2016 were living around a decade shorter than Israelis. What we want to look at is we also want to start comparing, what we would call non-communicable diseases. So what about ischemic heart disease? What are the comparisons there? And so if you look at the mortality rate, that first one, ischemic heart disease, Palestinians are 3 times more likely to die from ischemic heart disease than Israelis. And you can kind of go down the list and you'll see sort of how it matches up for things like COPD or cirrhosis or liver cancer. And then the other thing that's really important, and something that is, I think, gets a lot of attention and focus is going to be maternal morbidity and mortality. And so these are things that really help crystallize the disparities in health outcomes. And so what we can see again is the maternal mortality rates in Israel as of 2013 and the occupied Palestinian territories. I will say bringing that number down in half is actually a very encouraging sign by the Palestinian healthcare workers that are practicing, especially in these resource-constrained settings. But of course, it's totally, the gap is really, really kind of horrifying to look at. And then, I think we can go to the next. So, this is just kind of what we talked about. There was a military campaign that started in October 8th. And so, as a result of that, there's been a total lockdown of the 2 border crossings, pedestrian border crossings. We can go to the next slide here. And these are the numbers that we know so far. We touched on this. I'm not going to dive too deep in. I do want to say 2 things. First and foremost, these casualty, these numbers have not been updated in several days. Essentially, the Palestinian healthcare system has totally collapsed. Telecommunications are down. They should be back up tomorrow, we hope, because there was fuel for the first time that was able to enter today. And there are also what we think is probably 2,000 to 3,000 people who are presumed dead who are still trapped beneath the rubble. And just want to show you again the distribution of the casualties. Again, near Gaza City is where you'll see the most of it. That's the most densely populated area. And I think we can go to the next. So, the scale of the damage, what we know so far, and these are from people on the ground. I like to make sure that any of the numbers that we have on here are from quote unquote like neutral parties or third parties. For some reason, this is the first time in my experience where a lot of things have been called into question. I think I don't know. I can speculate on what the motivation for that is, but I think I don't want to gloss over the scale of human suffering and loss, arguing whether or not numbers are accurate. This is civilian infrastructure that's damaged, and that's particularly important from a healthcare perspective because they go hand in hand. So if we think that 41,000 housing units have been destroyed, and we put that into context with 1 million people who have been displaced from their homes, 750,000 who are in UN shelters in the south, those homes are destroyed, there becomes a shelter problem in the Gaza Strip, and they need to be able to go back to their homes. So that becomes a public health issue for multiple reasons. But if we think half of people's homes were damaged or destroyed, and we think 300 educational facilities have been destroyed and 600,000 kids are not going to school, then probably monitoring vaccination rates among children, monitoring, appropriately sort of what the food intake or the caloric intake is for children, all of those things go away. We're not able to do that accurately. 11 bakeries destroyed. Of course, this is something that already impacts the food insecurity issue we talked about. So these bakeries were helping reduce some of the food insecurity. We're dependent on food coming in from the outside of the Gaza Strip. Now we lose our ability to sustain ourselves somewhat with these bakeries, and that again exacerbates the problem. 55 ambulances have been damaged or destroyed. We'll come to, well, I should at least mention that being a healthcare worker in this time has proven to be quite dangerous. We know that over 20 first responders have been killed in their line of duty, 200 healthcare workers have been killed, and then we know that several healthcare workers and their families are just displaced and unable to kind of have any sort of ability to use their skills. 20 wash facilities are damaged, 3 churches, 74 mosques. So these are all, this is all infrastructure that was used for public health campaigns and outreach. I mean, these are the places that we were using when we were trying to get people to get vaccinated for COVID, when we were able to get vaccines, which was an entirely separate issue. You know, the Pfizer and had a deal with Israeli citizens where they were kind of essentially agreeing to share the public data of people getting vaccinated and able to monitor the outcomes. But the vaccination, or I should say the vaccines, did not reach the Gaza Strip until much, much later, until many people in Israel had already gotten their 3rd dose. So, water and sanitation, we know there are 2 pipelines coming from Israel. In the northern side right now, there's no access to any sort of clean water. They are essentially drinking brackish water or salty water, which is of course totally unsafe. And the second part of this in terms of water and sanitation is waste removal. And so a lot of sewage infrastructure has been destroyed, and what we're seeing is waste is starting to rise up in several populated areas, and especially in the north where they're sort of trapped. And that of course has its own implications for communicable diseases, which we're starting to see, and I'll sort of touch on that. We know that there are 1,000 kidney failure patients. We talked about Dr. Alouk just recently, who was killed, who was on the Democracy Now! Interview. He was the only nephrologist in the north of Gaza. And so he has been killed. Those sort of implications for the 1,000 people who, if they miss up more than 2 weeks of dialysis, is essentially a death sentence, right? And so if you don't have a specialist monitoring their ability to receive care, it's catastrophic. We know about the famous story in the Shifa hospital with the 37 premature infants in the incubators, 3 of whom have died as a result of the lack of fuel, and 40 or so patients who are at risk of dying in the ICU, 10 of whom have died, what we're being told by the director of a Shifa hospital. And we talked about the kids not being able to go to school and over half of the educational facilities being hit. This is something I just want to point your attention to here. In every conflict prior to what's happening in Gaza right now, all 3 of those crossings were open. They were especially open to the United Nations and NGOs like Med Global or the PCRF. This is the first time we've seen that the 2 that are where the Israelis are actually there are totally closed and shut up. Not a single thing has moved through them since October 7th, with the exception of those Palestinian workers who were sent back to Gaza. Right now we're relying totally on Rafah. Prior to this crisis, 500 trucks a day are entering from those 3 crossings. 500 trucks of all of the UN's humanitarian kind of kits, sanitation kits, medications, fuel, diesel fuel specifically. And so what we've seen is, as of, this was updated as of November 14th. These numbers are slightly higher, but I think you'll understand what I'm trying to say here. But if we're getting 500 trucks a day, and the total since October 21st, when Rafah was first opened, only 1,139 trucks have entered, that means we're barely at 2 days worth of supplies in a conflict that has now stretched past 40 days. And so that's kind of why you hear the UN, especially their humanitarian chief, calling Gaza a graveyard for children, or that this is one of the worst humanitarian crises that is unfolding. Go to the next slide. The other thing is, I'll just mention it here. So this is one of the buildings of a Shifa hospital. What the Palestinians in Gaza thought, based on their previous experience with other conflicts, is that if their home was destroyed, they'd be either to shelter at a UN facility or at the perimeter of the hospital. A Shifa hospital is their biggest hospital, their trauma center, their referral center, has around 200 beds, for inpatient beds, so somebody who needs to be admitted. They have a couple of operating rooms. They have 1 cardiologist who can do services for somebody who has a heart attack, who has an MI. What we saw was, during the first few weeks, around 50,000 people were sheltering here. And the media were amongst a lot of them. There were a lot of journalists who would Shifa was home base. A Shifa director had been telling us early on that if there's no fuel that's crossing, these hospital services not only going to shut down, but essentially we're committing the patients in these hospitals to death. And multiple calls, we need to have fuel to power the generators, to keep the lights on. As long as there are airstrikes and buildings being destroyed and people being killed, you have to be able to have a hospital working to receive all of these people. And what we saw was the opposite was happening, is that we were watching hospital by hospital shut down because of a lack of fuel. And then eventually the hospitals that were still sort of receiving people, everything else was gone, depleted. And in a trauma scenario, I work at a trauma hospital. One of the biggest questions we always ask is the blood bank. Is there blood in the bank so that if somebody comes in with a gunshot wound, if somebody comes in with some sort of wound, we're able to transfuse and give them blood? It's an essential question. It's probably the #1 item that you need. Well, in Gaza, these things have run out weeks ago. They're not able to transfuse blood for some of these people. And so what happens is the patients bleed out and die from shock. Again, we talked about 1,000 dialysis patients. There are 52,000 pregnant women in Gaza, around 185 births per day. There are only a handful of hospitals that have maternity wards, and a third of the people in Gaza get C-sections. And so we don't have anesthesia, we don't have power. How can we perform a C-section? A third of the C-sections that are performed will be for premature babies who will need specialized care. Maybe a NICU, maybe a newborn nursery, maybe they need an incubator, maybe they need to be intubated and on a ventilator. So these are major questions that are, I don't want to say ignored, but the healthcare system has to neglect these as there's an influx of trauma patients coming in. So, you know, to say that the healthcare system has collapsed, I think is really to put it lightly. But essentially, there are no true healthcare services in Gaza. There's just first aid buildings. Especially, and Shifa is really, I think the director said it best, he said, we're no longer a hospital, we're just a structure. And this was when they were surrounded and that there was this, this sort of new front in terms of being able to target these hospitals. And the way that you target them is you surround them and you don't allow anybody to leave. And so that's why our staff has been there trapped inside of a Shifa for 6 days. Doctors Without Borders today said for a week they've not been able to evacuate their staff from any of the northern hospitals. So this is, again, totally unprecedented. How do you respond to this? How do you deal with this? It's something that we're all still trying to figure out and navigate. And again, the staff that's there, 40 plus days, they're also food insecure. They also are without water. What they're being asked to do is way beyond their capacity. And people like, Dr. Alo or even Azam from the March of Return, they're putting their lives at risk, and it's just totally unfair what we're asking of them. Even if you are a humanitarian relief worker and you are on assignment and you head to the worst conflict area or one of the most devastating areas like Darfur when there was a genocide there, every single organization says, look, you got to have your time off in terms of 2 days a week, but after 4 weeks you need to leave away from this area for 1 week, rest and relaxation, because that sort of effect on someone's mental health, on their wellness, is undeniable. What we're asking the healthcare workers in Gaza to do is superhuman. Honestly, it's remarkable that they're able to just continue to deliver the care that they're delivering. Go to the next slide. So the shelters, this is very concerning, because what Israel initially asked people in the north of Gaza to do was to flee south. And that's a cumbersome journey to begin with. They said, if you go south, you'll be safe in the south. So 800,000 people went to shelters in the south. 1.1 million people got displaced from their homes. About 500,000 people stayed in the north because they couldn't make the journey for whatever reason. So they're stuck in these shelters. A lot of them look like this. These double as schools. They can double as other facilities that the community needs. What you'll see is in about a 400 to 500 square foot room, you'll put around 9 people in there. You are 9 times over capacity. It's 1 person for every it's 200 people for every toilet. It's 700 people for every shower. The shower only runs 2 hours a day with the brackish water that I mentioned earlier. And so this is a public health disaster and crisis on a scale that is really significant. And I think what people don't realize is when I hope that there is a ceasefire tomorrow, but we'll be dealing with this sort of public health crisis for years after this. For years, especially if I just told you that half of the homes are destroyed or damaged.
Yeah.
And so this is critical. What you want to do in the immediate moment is you want to make sure that people have proper sanitation, hygiene kits. You want to have some sort of filters for the water. We know that there are 800 cases of chickenpox that have spread through these camps. We know that there are over 1,000 cases of diarrheal illnesses like cholera. So this is sort of the forgotten, or I should say, it doesn't get as much light on in terms of the media coverage in terms of this, but this is very concerning. I mean, this is something you can't ignore. And anybody that wants to respond to the crisis, this is one of the first things that you'll respond to. And then these operations now are only depending on sort of the solar panels. You can kind of see one maybe up there, which can provide 2 or 3% of the fuel needs of a massive shelter like that. The other thing I'll mention is, as of 3 days ago now, people in the south are being asked to move, to southwest. I mean, this is sort of like an unconscionable sort of ask. People who are already displaced once, and so. I don't know, I can't say what the intentions of anybody is, but what I can tell you what it looks like from somebody who's been in the field, who's kind of trying to evaluate this. It seems like we're trying to continue shuffling people to a certain location, and the south of Gaza is not that location, is what I can at least say for certainty. So I thought you're going to move everybody from the north to the south. Now, I'm not sure where you're trying to move these people, but I know you're trying to move them. We can go to the next slide. Again, just to mention on water, 1% of the wash needs in the Gaza Strip are being met as of yesterday. Again, we're talking about water, sanitation. Prior to the conflict, the people in Gaza were getting, per person, it's about 88 liters per person for all your needs. Water, food, about 88 liters of water. In comparison, the World Health Organization says the minimum for any human being living on the planet should be 100 liters. Looking at Israel next door, because they're the closest party there, they're at around 240, 250 liters per person. Looking at us here in the United States, we're at about 300 liters per person. And as of today, in the Gaza Strip, they're about 3 liters per person. So, we are consuming sort of water for our everyday needs at a ratio of 100 to 1 compared to the people in Gaza. And that's just, that has massive public health implications. And I think we can go to the next slide. Food, we talked about food insecurity in Gaza. I do want to mention just about some of the structural damage that we've seen and the negative coping mechanisms that have been reported in the north. So basically people rationing items amongst themselves and their families, doing things like uncooked eggplant or raw onion, trying to use that to sustain themselves over several days. We know that the problem with reaching the 500,000 people in northern Gaza is it's just not safe for any person to do. It's very dangerous to kind of try to have any of the humanitarian aid organizations deliver to them. They've been told by the Israeli military to not even try to do that and that they would be treated as hostile. And so these people are just to fend for themselves in a place that's all of its civilian infrastructure has been leveled, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. And then in the south, where it's supposed to be better and safe, you have people who are queuing for half a loaf of bread for a family of 5 for several hours. Again, food insecurity, it's not just about being hungry. I would phrase it as how Oxfam did, and that's that starvation is being used as a weapon. A week ago, the Middle East Regional Director saying, this is a weapon being used against the civilian population of Gaza. And then again, we talked about the bakeries that have been struck. Humanitarian access, we talked about how many trucks a day they need. This is a picture from 2 weeks ago at the Rafah border. All of these trucks are lined up waiting to cross in. There are over thousands of trucks from government agencies, from the United Nations, from NGOs waiting to enter. And the process is actually very cumbersome. So we know that as of today, the first day will be tomorrow, where there will be around 30,000 liters of fuel. The Gaza Strip needs anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000 a day, but they'll get 30,000. And hopefully that will help with telecommunications and some generators for some hospitals and some shelters. But these trucks are going through 7 separate inspections by the Egyptian authorities, by the Israeli authorities. And things like oxygen delivery systems for like a ventilator or a mask for like
somebody who needs a nebulizer treatment for a respiratory illness or like an asthma exacerbation. Those things are being rejected outright. Anything with any sort of electrical wiring being rejected, thrown away. And so, even though there is, I think, a tremendous amount of response that's waiting at the border, I'm very concerned about what's actually entering. And then the second part of this is when it enters, how can we deliver it to the recipients who are in need? How can the beneficiaries access this in a safe manner? And that question has not been answered yet. The Palestinian Red Crescent has been willing to distribute it. I just told you that 20 of their first responders have been killed in this process. They're not going to go to the north. They're not allowed to go to the north. And then how can we ask beneficiaries to come to a site if we know that that Khan Yunis, for example, which is in the south, was just told to evacuate? So it's a very perilous sort of a journey. You're asking people in this very serious time to come and get a loaf of bread or some rice. I mean, it's an impossible choice that we're leaving the people in Gaza. And the workers on the ground, many of whom are Palestinians who are working for these organizations, we're asking them essentially to figure it out. Figure it out. Yeah, I know that there are airstrikes all around, that there's this sort of suffocating siege, but figure it out. And so, again, if there's any sort of humanitarian corridor established, or a ceasefire that's established, unless there's unfiltered access for some of this humanitarian aid, and that there is a serious cessation of airstrikes, then 5 days, which is what was most recently proposed, is woefully inadequate, and it's a joke. I mean, we are doing a total disservice to people who were pretending that, hey, we're going to alleviate some of the suffering. Yeah, that's the one truck. Okay, I think. Just in terms of fuel, again, Gaza has a single power plant, has not been operating since October 11th. Some of the energy comes from Israel, but in general, during a normal day, 13 hours of the day is dependent on fuel that is imported into the Gaza Strip. And so none of that has arrived. And so we see why they're in this sort of predicament in terms of being able to function or have any sort of operational facilities that can help the people there. All right, next slide. Again, this is just sort of your public health impact of all of the things that I mentioned. Whether somebody thinks that fuel is not related to medicine or desalination or water or food access, every single person who has worked in these settings, anybody who's worked in public health, any sort of healthcare worker and humanitarian aid relief worker knows that this is sort of this vicious negative cycle that perpetuates itself unless there's a total ceasefire, and again, that these organizations are able to do their work unrestricted. Again, just another comment about Shifa Hospital. As of today, I told you at the highest point there was 50,000 people. We think that there's probably between 5,000 and 7,000 people who are still sheltering. I can't say sheltering anymore, I should say who are under siege in the hospital compound. 650 patients in the hospital. The maternity ward has been destroyed. The cardiology ward has been destroyed. And in terms of the premature neonates, that's something that I think has been highlighted. A mass grave for 170 people was dug because of people who were trying to flee after being told, go to the south through the east corridor of a Shifa compound. 170 of them were killed. And so a mass grave was dug because their bodies were beginning to decompose. I'll comment also on, there was a story that was in the news. Again, I don't want to make any judgments about anybody's intentions. I just care about the facts. But the IDF had offered the Shifa hospital 300 liters of diesel fuel so that they can power the incubators. And the director of the Shifa hospital responded that he found that would be a very cruel and unusual way to provide 30 minutes of an incubator power for some of these infants that need 24 hours worth. I mean, it's just not serious. I think that's what most healthcare providers know when they hear that. I think that that's part of the message that I think needs to be communicated. Next slide. Just again, when I say unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe, I'm not using my own words. I'm just looking at all of the established organizations that have been in Gaza on the ground for over 2 decades, who have witnessed multiple conflicts, not just in Gaza, but everywhere else. My organization, for example, in Ukraine, in Yemen, in Syria, in Sudan, a lot of work on the migrant crisis here in the States. So this is just totally unprecedented. It's nothing we've seen before. And how we respond, there is no catalog, there's no blueprint of what we're supposed to do. And then I wanted to leave you with, if you go to the next slide, just kind of, what we're talking about when I talk about some of these areas. This is the staff for Med Global. The hijabi in the middle there, that's the country representative. She's trapped in a Shifa hospital. Her name is Rajat Musleh. She's a nurse by training. She's been doing this sort of work for 30 years. This is in the red is Mohammed Jarrad. He is the procurement director for the Med Global office. He's trapped in a Shifa hospital. This is kind of what the coastline looks like. That person may look like a surfer. That's a fisherman. So that's sort of the board that they're using. They're using paddle boards. They swim out around 2 miles and they'll cast their net. This is right across the street from a Shifa hospital, that marketplace that you see. And so, again, I'm not a military expert, I'm not a military strategist. I can just tell you that where a Shifa is located in Gaza City is such a central location for anybody that wants to have access and control of the north of Gaza. This is a main marketplace, many residential buildings. It's bustling when there aren't F-16s above head, with people going in and out. And so, again, I think that's what is really important to consider. And then on top over there's an orthopedic surgeon in Gaza. He, just looking at the coastline, what he's pointing to actually is you can see a factory with like some smoke coming out of it. That is Ascalon or Ashkelon, which is on the Israeli side. That just kind of pointing at how close it is and how different some of the health outcomes are just based on less than 50 kilometers. And then the next slide is just kind of some of the devastation that we're seeing. And I'm sorry that some of these images may be really, really intense, but I think it's important to go through. But this, for any sort of healthcare worker, knows the sort of calamity that you must be in. We have a pediatric patient who's on a ventilator machine on the floor, hooked up to an oxygen tank. They're not hooked up to an oxygen delivery system like I have at my hospital, where it comes from sort of a central supply. This is a tank that's going to run out, right? And you have multiple people here, multiple wounded. This is called an X-fix for any orthopedic people in here. But this person basically just had surgery to set a fracture, put in place, and on a stretcher on the floor. There's no space. That initial part of his care has been complete, but the follow-up care is missing, of course. And then, kind of how devastated the infrastructure is and how people are there. Just want to kind of highlight there are still people trapped beneath there that we have to presume are dead at this point, and that will increase into this already insane casualty toll. And I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure. I think I probably went way over time, so I apologize. But thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for speaking. That was really powerful. We have our third speaker. We have Deanna Ahmed. She's both a journalist and an educator. She has a bachelor's degree in English and International Studies and a master's in journalism, both from Northwestern University. She currently teaches high school English as well as a course on media and culture. She has been published in the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, Salon.com, and many other outlets. She has also served as the assistant editor of the Islamic Horizons magazine. Ms. Ahmed has served on the board of AMP Chicago for 12 years. She's from the West Bank but has traveled to Gaza twice, most recently in June 2023.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for having me. I know I'm not a healthcare worker, but I'm here to kind of talk a little bit about media and the role that it plays and what's currently unfolding in Gaza. before I kind of get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about my personal experience. Traveling to Gaza this past summer before everything had began, and what that experience was like. It was a very difficult journey, and some of the things that Dr. Ahmed illustrated through some of the images he showed, you know, kind of even reflect the best case scenario when you're traveling through the border. The border with Egypt, coming from Chicago, it took us nearly 3 days to make that journey. And so anybody who is not in good health, anybody who has young children or people who are elderly, it's a very, very arduous journey to make, just as a regular person, not going through an NGO or anything like that, through the Rafah crossing. It took, you know, I would say between 12 hours to just get processed when we were at Rafah, and to get there from Cairo took probably 8 to 10 hours. As far as driving, and being stopped multiple times through different checkpoints by Egyptian forces. And that means having your vehicle searched, having your luggage searched, having the individual searched, taking your passports, paperwork, etc., multiple times throughout this. And along a journey through the desert, where there are no resources really along the way, the route that you're taking. And where you have to have a car in line to take you that has been waiting at the border for a couple of days, because even before this, the number of cars that are allowed to go through the Rafah crossing per day was limited. And so you had to register and make sure that your car was able to go that route, and that you're able to get on the ferry that's over the Suez Canal over there. So it was by no means a simple process, and it's by no means a predictable process either, because there are really not necessarily things that are outlined or defined for you as far as what the requirements are. So when we arrived at Rafah, we had to produce our marriage certificate, we had to produce our kids' birth certificates, because my husband is from Gaza and I am not. It had to be proven so that I could enter with him. Because as an American citizen, there is no guarantee that I will have any recourse should anything happen. So that was obviously something that was difficult to go through. And then once we did make it through the border, you have to register in order to be able to exit as well. And you have to have an exit date that is set, which is not always necessarily approved in line with when your plane tickets are. We also had a family member with us who was not in the best of health, who was coming from Egypt, and it was very difficult for her to make that journey alone, so she entered with us, but she was not allowed to exit with us. And so that was also a very difficult thing to go through, again, before any of the devastation had taken place. I have family that are in the healthcare system there. So anesthesiology nurse and a dialysis nurse who are in the family. One of them is still in Al-Shifat trapped there. And his family was also sheltering there, so siblings, mother, children, wife. They all basically fled from Shifat. He remained to take care of patients. We were not able to find out where the rest of the family went, so they are somewhere. We're told they're alive, but we don't know where they necessarily have gone. Other family members had gone from the Jabalia refugee camp, which is where we were in the summer, and they made the journey south to Deir al-Balah, where they were told they would be safe. However, there has been constant airstrikes there as well. And they've told us that their windows have shattered in just from the impact of airstrikes nearby. The Jabalia camp, which you saw some images of, in the best of scenarios, is an extremely difficult place to live in. From the overcrowding, the maze-like nature of the way it's designed, cement blocks and cement walls, very, very tight quarters where you can hear the children next door crying, you can hear even what they're saying. very little privacy, very little access to any sort of movement there. So the children have no greenery, there's no grass, there are no trees, you don't see any birds flying, there are no parks, they're just playing in the sewage or in the dirty streets, kicking around garbage. And again, this is before it's been completely flattened. And the market area there, which was the only place that people could kind of go and walk around and buy things that they need, that's been completely flattened as well. My sister-in-law, she is a nurse, but she also was one of the people who needed to make that journey through ERAS for healthcare. And it took her months to get approval to make that trip. And once she made it, she actually had showed me that the image that Dr. Ahmed showed, she was only able to take like a small plastic bag with her because they didn't allow her to bring anything in with her. And so she had seen me with a very small, like, zippered bag, and she was like, oh, do you think I could have that so when I have to go to the checkpoint, I can put my stuff in it? And I just couldn't fathom, like, you don't even know how long you're going to be there, and you can't even bring anything with you. My other sister-in-law needed oxygen. She has fibrosis, and she was having a very hard time breathing. We were there about a month and a half. It took about a month for us to get one for her, to get the oxygen. So again, this is under the best of circumstances, with money available, with transportation available, everything in the best possible condition you could want, and it was extremely, extremely difficult. So I just wanted to read you, before I get into my presentation, a note that I received from a family member who was in Shifat, because the speakers talked about the bread and the lack of availability of food and water, and one of the things that they keep mentioning to us is how thirsty everyone is. Not even just hungry, just thirsty, because it's harder even to cope with thirst than hunger. And so he says, we haven't had bread in 4 days due to the chaos at Shifat Hospital, where my family and I have been sheltering since being displaced from our homes. I usually stay up all night and sleep during the day. At 3:30 a.m., I saw some guys with bread. I was curious, so I asked which bakery they got it from, and they told me, and they said there was no line at the moment, so I should go quickly. It's a little far from Shifat, but I decided to go, as I'd rather die of starvation than stand in an hours-long bread line. I convinced another guy to go with me in the darkness of the night, although he was scared of leaving. We spent the 8-minute walk reading prayers and saying our last rites, and through the terrors of the night, I started imagining how a missile would land on us. We got to the bakery and saw half the world lined up for the bread, and fights were already breaking out on the inside. I knew it would be evening again before our turn came, so I told my friend to keep it moving to the other bakery. Perhaps we can reserve a spot and come back in the morning. We were halfway there before my imagination turned into reality. An artillery mortar shell landed in front of us. Luckily, we were at a crossroads and were able to crouch behind a wall. All around us were other guys praying and screaming, and I kid you not, I burst into laughter. How could a mortar shell scare me when I have a master's degree in constant warfare by now? Anyway, I walked back to the hospital and found my friend had already ran there before me in fear. Thank God for shortcuts, for safety, and may we never crave bread again. So, I mean, I don't have to kind of explain, those words speak for themselves as far as how dire the situation is there. You know, healthcare workers and journalists have been among the people targeted most in what's happening right now. There is a friend of mine who lost both parents in the past week because they fled their home. They were told that they should flee, and the house was indeed flattened, but they were shot on the way when they were fleeing. And so both her mother and father were killed, as well as other family members. And they weren't even able to access their bodies yet, the people there too, in order to bury them. So again, the situation is just simply unfathomable, and I think that it's really important to humanize what is happening. So there are a lot of, you know, we see the statistics and the facts and all of the information, but really knowing people and knowing what they're going through shows the unspeakable horrors that are happening. The talk about, the mental impacts even, following what's happening. During the summer, my daughter volunteered at Shifat. She was a college student and she wanted to get some exposure to the medical field. And so she was in the ER there, again, under much, much better circumstances. And she just communicated how many cases were related to mental health and people dealing with trauma, not realizing that that's what was happening, that they were dealing with trauma, and that's why their bodies were reacting. And how stretched thin they were for supplies. So like not being able to use gloves or change gloves or masks or other things that we really take for granted here. Things are disposable and available at every turn. So again, I can't even imagine what the situation is going to be like when hopefully, God willing, this ends as soon as possible. The reconstruction, the care that's going to be needed for the infrastructure and for the humans that are there. You can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to touch on the importance of media literacy and being aware of where we're getting our information from. Because as we've seen with the numerous false stories that have been circulated regarding what is happening and the different conditions that the people in Gaza are in, we really have to be conscious consumers of media and understanding where our information is coming from and what sources are being used in order to obtain that information. Go to the next slide. So these are obviously some of the questions that we should ask ourselves when examining any form of media, right? What is the source? Is it credible? Is it reliable? What is potentially missing, right, from this story? And we see that Palestinian voices and Palestinian sources are not just missing from a lot of the media coverage, but they're also questioned, right, whether they are accurate or reliable. And so we see a lot of the health statistics specifically being quoted as the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. And they make it a point to say the Hamas-run. While ministries of health in any place are run by the government, right? And so to make a point of saying that it's Hamas-run is no accident, right? It's to call into question the integrity of that information. And when you insert that word in there, people are like, oh, okay, they say that? Well, maybe I don't know if that's true, right? But where else are you going to get your information from? From the army that's committing those atrocities? Those are the voices and the sources that we're going to trust above the people who are on the ground. So it truly doesn't make sense. However, when we become sort of inclined to react to certain words in a certain way, then we begin to call into question that information. You can go to the next one. Next one. So these are some of the terms that we just want to be aware of, and I'm not sure if the first speaker touched on some of these already, but some of the terminology that we want to be using when discussing what is happening and just to be aware of in media. So even the concept of colonialism. This is something that now Israel is trying to fight back against, saying that this is not actually, how can you talk about Israel as a colonial project? But that's what it is, plain and simple. It's a settler colony that was founded on land that was already inhabited by other people. That is the textbook definition of settler colonialism. And so they're really trying to push back against this narrative through different forms of media, through different organizations, who are calling into question whether colonialism even applies to Israel. So I've seen this in The Atlantic. I've seen this today, I think it was Elon Musk tweeted that he's not decolonization and I forgot the other word, anti-Zionism are not, these are not terms that we can use when we're talking about Israel. And so apartheid is another one that Israel absolutely hates. But this is, again, a simple fact regarding all of the maps that you guys saw at the beginning regarding freedom of movement, different roads, different sections, different IDs, different access. even as far as resources. So the water now, Dr. Ahmed talked about that, but even in a normal situation, the water is limited, the electricity is limited, right? So when we were there in the summer, we had about 4 to 6 hours of electricity per day before this. And so this was in summer, 90+ degree weather, in a refugee camp that is tightly packed without air circulation, without electricity to run fans. If the electricity is out, the water is not going to come down through the system from the roof. So there are many different things that are connected to the electricity. It's not just, charging your phone or running your fridge or whatever. It's the entire system, right? Yes, there are generators that are available, but not everyone can afford to have access to them. Not everyone can afford fuel. And even when they can, if they use it excessively, they can't afford the cost of it, right, in the summer especially. So apartheid is the most accurate way to describe that. The other thing is the control by air and sea and land, obviously. We witnessed people not being able to go very far at all. I think Dr. Ahmed mentioned about 2 miles. It looked like even less than that. So we were even at a restaurant that was on the beach, and the fish was being farmed. The fish that the restaurant was using, they had little pools, and they were farming fish there. And I'm like, does that make sense? There's a beach in the ocean, and they have to farm the fish because they don't have access to actually get the fish from the ocean. And so all of those things, it's just, paradox after paradox. Like a beautiful, beautiful coastline, but it's a refugee camp along the coastline. And I kept thinking while I was there, if this coastline was anywhere else, it would be filled with resorts and tourists and restaurants and all kinds of things. But instead, everything here is destroyed and limited. So again, occupation and siege, those are other terms that we want to use when it comes to describing the actions of Israel. And then anti-Semitism, Zionism, and Judaism. So these are very important terms that are coming under fire in a lot of ways in media and people using this terminology in the workplace. Any sort of criticism of Israel and Zionism is being interpreted as anti-Semitism. Saying free Palestine is being interpreted as anti-Semitism. Using any sort of expression that is related to liberation and freedom of Palestinians is now being called anti-Semitic. And so we're seeing a lot of focus on rise in anti-Semitism, but we're not really understanding, well, where is the evidence for this coming from? And a lot of the cases that are being cited are cases where people are saying free Palestine. And so we don't want to conflate that sort of criticism of Israeli policy with being anti-Semitic or being against Jews, right? Because obviously that is not the case. And we would never endorse anti-Semitism because racism in any of its forms is not acceptable in any movement for liberation, right? And so, unfortunately, this sort of conversation is being twisted and manipulated so that people feel muzzled and that they can't say anything because anything that they say is going to be misinterpreted. Next one. So these are just some terms that we kind of want to be aware of in terms of the storytelling when it relates to Palestine and to Gaza. So what sort of framework is the narrative being told in? Whose voice is it in? Whose voice is left out of the story? What is the paradigm that we're looking at? So even the way that it's being talked about as the Israel-Hamas war, right? It implies that this is a war between two sides that are on equal footing, that have equal access to military might, when obviously we know that this is not the case, right? And so when you begin your storytelling and your narrative on those grounds, well, it's already been distorted. You're not telling an accurate story from the get-go, right? And so we tend to see things in these binaries, right? The good guys versus the bad guys. That's kind of the narrative that we're always fed, regardless of what the conflict is. And you want to be on the side of the good guys. And the good guys usually are the ones that are in line with what your government is pushing, right? Whatever narrative the government is pushing. We've seen, genocidal language from the Israeli government. We've seen it from different officials. We've seen it from Netanyahu, who tweeted about this being a war between the children of light and the children of darkness. And those were his words. And so that kind of, anybody who has any sort of command of language or critical thinking skills will see right through that, right? But if you're susceptible to, these sort of propaganda techniques, then that's the way that you begin to think, right, in terms of those binaries. Go to the next slide. You can skip this one. So this is a quote that is from Toni Morrison that just illustrates how important the language that we use when talking about certain things and certain conflicts is in terms of how we internalize those stories. So it says oppressive language does more than represent violence, it is violence. Does more than represent the limits of knowledge, it limits knowledge. Whether it is obscuring state language or the faux language of mindless media or language designed for the estrangement of minorities, hiding its racist plunder in its literary cheap, it must be rejected, altered, and exposed. So I personally love this quote because it pretty much illustrates the way that people are able to get away with war crimes and get away with genocide, because this is the way they justify it in terms of the language that is used about the population being targeted. You can go to the next one. This is another quote that focuses specifically on the way that Palestinians are covered in media. And so there's a lot of passivity used in the language discussing their deaths, right? And so we often see like they died, they were killed, etc., without who is the actor, right? Who is the person or what is the action that is committing this murder? We don't usually ever see the word murder used, by the way. And so this is kind of highlighting that fact that oppressed people everywhere, when they are killed twice. First by the bullet or bomb, and next by the language used to describe their deaths. So they're even robbed of that position of victimhood. And that's something that we've seen consistently with the way that Palestinian victims are discussed, is that they are not even able to enjoy their status as victims. They cannot even claim that because they are still portrayed as animalistic and savage and terrorist harboring and whatever else you want to add to that list. And so they're not even deserving of people mourning them or seeing them as human beings in the way that their stories are told. And it's very similar in terms of American media to the way that Black victims are portrayed through whether it's television, whether it's on the internet, whether it's print news. When the victim is Black, somehow they become the ones on trial in public perception and in the media. So you'll see photos of them in compromising situations, or even the facial expression they use, or something they did when they were in 3rd grade, like some ridiculous things, right? But when you see the aggressor, the person who murdered them, who's white, you've got a smiling picture, you've got, oh, his neighbor saying he seemed like a good guy, right? You have every excuse for that person to be seen as a human being, while the victim is not. And it's the same kind of situation when it comes to coverage of Palestinian deaths. So these are just some examples of headlines. So you can see the red that's highlighted, so behind Hamas's bloody gambit to create a permanent state of war, so sensationalism, conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, undermining credibility, so explosion, Ghazans say, was airstrike, leaves many casualties in dense neighborhood. So, not saying a refugee camp, not saying that this is pretty much an objective fact where what the explosion was caused by. And we saw this called into question with the bombing of the hospitals. Again, saying Hamas instead of Gaza, so the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, which is the example I talked about before. Saying 102 workers killed without naming who killed them. And then Hamas fails to make case that Israel struck hospital. So like you have to prove that you are not guilty, right? And then the other image just shows different patterns of erasure that Israel has used from 1982 until the present. So censorship, dehumanization, targeting of journalists, labeling anyone who dares deny propaganda as terrorists, minimizing Arab deaths, etc. So these are all things that we're pretty much aware of, but we need to kind of make sure that we are recognizing the patterns when we see them in media. You can go to this one. So I think the QR code is not working, but I put up the screenshot. This is an example of an op-ed that was run in the New York Times by author Hala Alian. Some of you may have read her book, Salt Houses, and she also has a lot of poetry that she publishes. So she wrote a piece in the New York Times titled, "Why Must Palestinians Audition for Your Empathy?" It was a very, very powerful piece talking about why Palestinians are always on the defensive, always pleading their case to be seen as victims or even as humans. A very well done piece. Well, the headline was edited to "The Palestine Double Standard." And it was very odd because I read the article when it had the initial headline because the headline drew me in. I was like, yeah, that's something I always think about, right? And it has a very emotional appeal to it. The next day, I clicked the link to read the article. I was having my class read it, actually. And I noticed the headline had changed. I'm like, what? Why would they change the headline? That's very odd. Obviously, the headline no longer has that humanistic approach. It doesn't have the emotionally charged question, right? You don't even know what perspective it's written from necessarily. The Palestine doubles could be anyone, right? And so one has to question, is that to discourage people from reading it? Like, I can't even come up with a rationalization as to why you would need to change that. And the other thing that was very odd was while we were reading it, and I had the link open, there was a student who was reading out loud, and the sentence that she read was different than the sentence on my screen. And I was like, wait, are you on a different paragraph? And she's like, no. And then I look at it, I refresh my page, the text changed. So the article was edited yet again, which doesn't, anyone who knows anything about media and op-eds, they're usually, once they're published, they're done. You're not going back to it. And so it was very odd that this piece was edited multiple times after it had already been published. You can go to the next one. So this is another example. This is from, I believe, the Sun Times. So you kind of see the progression of the article. This is the same article, and it went through different headlines and pictures. So it started with decorum calls, city council moves to rein in unruly crowds, threatening behavior at its meetings. And you have the image of the women's kind of screaming with the kufiyas and, you know, the standard. And then they changed it to city council drafts rules of decorum to manage disruptive crowds' behavior. And then they changed it to a black woman screaming. Then they changed it yet again. City council moves to rein in unruly crowds at its meetings. Okay, they put back the picture of the Palestinians. And then this was the version that went into the print paper. Council drafts rules of decorum to manage disruptive crowds. And you have kind of both sorts of images. You see the woman in hijab here and the woman in the kufiya, and then the picture of the black woman. So, I mean, this kind of speaks for itself. Again, you see the progression, you see the constant editing and going back over words and photos and all of that when, you know, the language, the photos, the images, the adjectives, everything that's used is very purposeful, right? And to lead your mind down a certain road. You can go to the next one. Next one. So these are, again, some words to be aware of. Militant, terrorist, radical, the usuals, right? The whole both sides rhetoric, the both sidesisms as we call it. describing it as a conflict or a clash, or even saying it's so complicated and complex, and I can't really say anything because there's just so much to talk about, and I don't really know the history. No, you can call out the murder of children, the murder of women, the murder of men, the murder of healthcare workers, the bombing of hospitals. These are things that are actually quite simple, right?
Sorry.
That's okay. And then I talked about the Israel-Hamas war, the problem with that, and then obviously the issue of terrorism versus self-defense. And so Israel loves that propaganda point that, you know, we're just targeting specific terrorists. We had to level a whole refugee camp to find that one terrorist that was hiding there. Or we had to attack the hospital because they were hiding, you know, a laptop and guns in the MRI machine or whatever. And so, you know, this is our self-defense, right? We have a right to defend ourselves. When in reality, the occupied has a right to defend themselves against the occupier, right? And so that whole narrative is obviously problematic as well. Go to the next one. So this is something that, I think you can go to the next one as well. You know, doxing specifically of healthcare workers is a big problem. And they have been before even this current, you know, onslaught of violence, they have been targeted in the past when it comes to activism for Palestine. So whether it's while they're still students, whether it's applying to graduate school, whether it's in residency or when, you know, you have an actual job, healthcare workers have been targeted, whether it's for posting certain things online or participating in certain protests, etc. And so this is something to be aware of, not necessarily to discourage you from activism. No, it's just about being aware of your rights, your, you know, position with your employer, and how you present yourself, right? And so, unfortunately, people are targeted so that they are, when somebody is known to support Palestine or to be Palestinian and to be in this field, a lot of times people go and search their history of their tweets, of their posts, etc., and often use it as something to send to their employer to potentially get them fired. There was a famous case of this a few years ago with a woman who was a resident at the Cleveland Clinic. I don't know if some of you guys remember or familiar with it, but she had posted some problematic stuff. There's no like defending what she posted, but she was, in most of the cases, she was a minor, like 17, I think, when she had posted it. And she went through, graduated high school, graduated college, graduated medical school, went to residency. And when she was a resident, her tweets were sent to her employer. Her story went viral all over the country and I think world. As basically her license was taken away, her medical license. And so she wasn't able to practice medicine in the US. There have been other cases where nurses have been called out because they were photographed for being at rallies and somebody sent it to their employer and tried to get them in trouble. Another case where somebody called out a speaker at a hospital that was supposedly brought in to talk about healthcare issues, but voiced their support for the Israeli government somehow, and the person challenged them. And somebody in the audience went to their program director and said, you know, this person should be fired, should be removed from their position. Again, they didn't say anything wrong. It was simply asking a question. So, you know, we just kind of want to be aware of what you're putting online, the language that you use, make sure that it's appropriate, make sure that maybe you don't want to have your real name. It's up to you, obviously, but it's just something to be aware of in this climate where people are being targeted. There is Palestine Legal, which is a good resource should you encounter, and hopefully you will not, any problems. But they are great with helping people navigate these sorts of situations. There was an article that was published, I think yesterday, on my Huffington Post, and it talked extensively about the rights of professionals in the workplace when it comes to activism for Palestine specifically and how to navigate that. And unfortunately, like the protection is not necessarily there if it's a private employer. Like they can usually terminate you without necessarily saying why, or you kind of know what the reason is, but it's not stated. And in that case, it's on you to basically prove that it was discrimination, and you sue them to allege that, and so it becomes very cumbersome for the person trying to prove that they didn't do anything wrong. But hopefully nobody will be in that situation, but it's just something to kind of be aware of. I think that's it. So yeah, there are just some resources, different pages on Instagram, different people to follow. The next one I have just an image of different, I know you can't see it, it's very small, but different journalists who are on the ground, and I'm happy to pass on any information to anyone personally if they have a specific question or a specific issue they want to know more about. I think that's it. Is that the last slide? Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Our last and final speakers are Reagan Denham, who is a queer health researcher, and Laura Fernandez, who has been a registered nurse for 10 years.
Hi everybody, we'll try to go fast. First, we just want to thank our amazing speakers. Can we get another round of applause?
And thank you guys for coming and making time on your Friday evening. Give yourself a round of applause. Okay, so we put out this workshop because since October 7, healthcare workers in Gaza have been continuously exposed to trauma and injury due to Israel's constant bombing in and around the hospital. The World Health Organization and Doctors Without Borders have already asked for Israel to call for an immediate ceasefire, but this has fallen on deaf ears. Israel has systematically attacked Gaza's hospitals, which is a war crime under international laws. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, and other healthcare workers are tirelessly working day and night to keep patients alive while also being attacked with missiles and having no fuel to fully operate, no supplies, and as previous speakers have said, they also don't have any food. I think a lot of us who are healthcare workers can relate with them because we went through a pandemic where a lot of us still have PTSD from that and anxiety, but at least we were able to go home. These doctors, nurses, healthcare workers are not able to see their families. They're working tirelessly without any breaks, and I think that is really unfair, and as healthcare workers, we should be fighting for them, and we should be asking for immediate ceasefire because it's just a humanitarian thing to do. Our national healthcare worker demands are that the U.S. healthcare systems and institutions recognize the public health disaster and genocide unfolding in Gaza and call for an immediate ceasefire. And we also demand that the U.S. healthcare systems and institutions condemn Israel's deliberate targeting of healthcare facilities and personnel. And we also want to demand that U.S. healthcare systems and institutions to protect all healthcare workers and trainees who are advocating for justice in Palestine and firmly denounce any doxing or censorship campaigns targeting human rights advocates and community leaders. And last, we want the U.S. healthcare systems and institutions to fully divest from weapon manufacturers which arm Israel's occupation and genocide in Gaza. We go to the next slide. These are examples of national and international efforts that have happened to help where people have gathered together to ask for immediate ceasefire or to come in solidarity with Palestine's hardship at the moment. For example, there was Israeli shipment blockage at Tacoma, Washington, and Melbourne, Australia. There's been U.S. protests all over the United States, and I think 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, Washington D.C. had 300,000 people rallying for a ceasefire. There's been dying demonstrations as well from Harvard. We just did one this past Thursday, and other cities as well. Even high school students are walking out in support of Palestine. Some examples of that are in the Bay Area and also New York City. There's global protests all over the world calling for a ceasefire, and no one is hearing us. There's also have been multiple countries such as Chile and Bolivia calling back their ambassadors from Israel to condemn the continuous bombing in Gaza. And there's been a lot of worker solidarity, which makes you think that the working class were uniting to refuse to transport weapons and military supplies to Israel, such as Barcelona dog trader unions and also Belgium dog trader unions. There's been protests outside senators' offices. For example, a lot of us have lots of faith in Bernie Sanders, so a lot of people who campaign for him protested outside his office to demand for him to call for a ceasefire. And then another thing is the White House staffers walking out because they have been hearing our calls to demand senators and U.S. representatives to cease fire, and they are not calling for it, even though thousands of us have been calling to demand that. Next slide. And then also Chicago has their own unique involvement in the movement. Since October, thousands of protesters have marched downtown asking for a ceasefire. On 11/7, there was a pro-Palestine march in Evanston. On the 9th, there was another protest asking Biden to support a ceasefire. The University of Chicago students have also done their own demonstrations. They did a sit-in at the admission office where many of them were arrested just for protesting. And then on the 13th of November, there was another protest with Jewish peace activists to block the Israeli consulate to demand a ceasefire. And like I said, this past Thursday, our organization had a dying demonstration at Federal Plaza to demand Tammy Duckworth to hear our calls for a ceasefire because she is not even answering her calls.
That's right.
Okay, next slide.
And so on this side, we just wanted to add some upcoming local events for folks who are in the area and want to get involved. Tomorrow, there's going to be a rally at Buckingham Fountain. The address is there. On November 21st, healthcare workers nationwide are planning to do movement work. We're also locally in Chicago going to be meeting up at the Louis Pasteur Monument. There are lots of upcoming workshops for allies who are organizing around Palestine, such as one coming up this Sunday. There's going to be one at Pilsen Books on Monday, so look out for that. And the Do No Harm Coalition nationwide is going to have national actions on Monday the 20th as well. So one thing we really wanted to talk about is just kind of ways that people can just in their day-to-day lives support Palestine. And conscious consumption is something that we really wanted to touch on briefly before we close out. I think people are familiar with BDS, Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And so these are some of the brands that are on the BDS list right now to try to avoid boycott. And a more comprehensive list you can find on their Twitter or on their website or on their Instagram. I also really encourage people to support Palestinian-owned businesses in Chicago. I know there's a really great restaurant in Hyde Park that people have been going to. I honestly just went on TikTok and typed in Palestinian restaurant Chicago and 12 came up. So you can do that if you'd like. and download the 5 Calls app to your phone. This makes it really easy to call or leave messages with your representatives in Congress. You can also email them, that's really common. I don't know how to work a fax machine, but like people have been recommending faxing because it's like a physical nuisance, and it makes it harder for them to do it because their computers or fax machine just blows up the things. Okay, next slide. So for more learning about Palestine, Haymarket, where we are, is offering free ebooks about Palestinian liberation. You can find a link to that on their website, on their Twitter, on their Instagram. The Palestinian Feminist Collective published this amazing, and completely comprehensive toolkit. It's like 15 pages long, but probably has like 500 links in it. To articles, movies, books, and organizations that are fighting for Palestine. And the Arab Film and Media Institute is currently featuring a free program called Palestinian Voices on their website through the end of November. And one thing I wanted to mention about contacting representatives, make sure when you reach out to them to say the word ceasefire, because a lot of them have been using like humanitarian pause or other made up things like not ceasefire, so just make sure to mention it by name. Next slide, please. And then this is something that I wanted to touch on, just because when I've been speaking to family members and friends about this, a lot of people will say like, well, I don't really know what there is that I could do. Like, I don't know how I can support this. But the reality is everybody has a certain kind of set of skills that they can apply to this work. And the social change ecosystem map acknowledges that. It's a framework that can help individuals, networks, and organizations align with their social change values and find their individual roles in movements. So the yellow circle in the middle is things about values we all have in common, like equity, liberation, justice, solidarity. And then the colorful circles are unique roles that people can play based on their skills. We here today are kind of like the weaver role because we're weaving Palestinian liberation in with health justice. That was kind of like what we were working on today. But people like caregivers, there's an organization in the Bay called the Freedom Community Clinic, and they've been providing like free Reiki, massages, yoga classes, just somatic healing for Arab and Muslim folks in the Bay. That's a great example of the caregiver role. Storytellers, like the Arab Film and Media Institute I mentioned before, showing films by Palestinian artists. I like this example because it finds like a spot for everybody. Everybody has something that they can contribute. No matter how small it may seem to you, it really will make a difference. That's it. You can scan our link tree to keep up with what we're doing.
And then there's snacks on the back.
Yeah. And shout out to Haymarket House.
Yay!